Business is messy and unpredictable.
Sometimes lonely.
So lonely.
So lonely.
And inspiration can often come from really weird places.
We pick up where the bullet point blogs and the highlight reels leave off.
We start with the stories. Welcome back to So Here's My Story. This is Jody.
I'm Elliot.
And I'm back in the United States.
Back in the United States. Should be a Beatles song,
back
but
in
not.
The USSA. No, that's not how it works. All right, yeah. Tiny bit jet lagged. I just got back in last night. But from spending 8 or 9 days away with our illustrious Christy Schmier in England and Italy. And my God, we had a good time.
Well, the thing that I found most interesting from the social media posts is that even while you were biking up and down the hills of Tuscany and eating, Christy was constantly writing show notes. I was amazed.
Show notes for our trip?
Yes.
This is why I asked her to. She's so good at, so we both, and this is a story I'll tell a different day. You know, we went to this legitimately one of objectively the best restaurants in the world. This Michelin 3-star restaurant. The whole trip was hinged around this one meal. And we both took tons of pictures and wrote everything. But then when we went back to and I promised people course by course playback. But then when I got back, I'm like, I don't even know how to begin. So I just waited for her to do it and then forwarded all of her posts.
Yeah, which is kind of like what we do.
Job. Yes. Exactly. So mucho thanks to Christy Schmier for all of that. But anyway. We have a new person. While I was gone, we welcomed a new person into the podcast community.
Yes, Sarah Robertson.
Sarah Robertson, here from the good old USA.
Yes, in Florida.
Florida, we believe. Welcome, Sarah. We look forward to hearing more about you and having your contributions in the group. And you want to thank our sponsors. And then if you don't mind, I have a story I want to tell from my trip.
I know that you came off the plane with stories.
I frankly have 42 stories, but I promise to not hog all the stories for the next few weeks. But
yes. So before we go any further, I'd like to thank Tom Loveland and Mind Over Machines, Cat's Copy, the architecture firm of GWWO, and Mary Craft Staffing and HR Solutions.
Okay, so here's my story.
Okay.
It's actually not from the trip. It's from the pre-trip heading. Well, it's after I left, but I flew from here to London via Iceland for officially, I think, the shortest layover ever. It was supposed to be 2 hours, and my plane was late, very, very late, and I ended up being in Iceland for 23 minutes, I think. But anyway, and then
just
from
enough
London,
time for the full tour.
Yeah, just been through Iceland. And then we met Christy in London, and the trip took off from there. But this story actually comes from the very first flight. It was Iceland Air. It was actually WOW Air, headed to Iceland, middle of the night flight. So, we left here at 7:30 at night on a Saturday or something, land in the middle of the night. So we're headed east, and we're over the ocean somewhere, and it's all dark. You know how nighttime flights are. It's dark. The lights are down. They're not going up and down the aisles. Three-quarters of the people are sleeping, except for me, who can't get to sleep. All of a sudden, the lights flick on, all the lights. I was right near the front. The curtain that they had that blocked off the flight attendants area whisks open. They're scurrying about. The captain comes on. He says, "Ladies and gentlemen, I please need your attention. Everyone, please put on your seatbelts, put away all luggage, just stow everything." The flight attendants are rushing up and down the aisles. Of course, not at all panic ensuing at all. Because everyone's also have just been jarred out of being asleep, right, which is the least time that you're I'm ready to calmly handle something. And he said, "We've just gotten word from up ahead of us. There is severe turbulence over Greenland, and we need to lock everything down. And then the flight attendants are also going to lock in." And so it was quite dramatic how much stuff was going on. And I was getting a little bit anxious, thinking how bad is this going to be?
Yeah,
and how long can it last? It's one thing to go through. I've been through 3 or 4 minutes of really intense turbulence, but what if this is 20 minutes of I don't even know. I was just imagining things out of movies and whatnot. But fortunately for me, the 2 people on either side of me were actually getting actively freaked out, which magically just calmed me down. And so then this conversation ensued that I was it was the first time on the trip of many, many, many that I was this would be a great story for the podcast. So, this conversation is going on between this one lady who I genuinely got the sense was about ready to go into like full panic mode, and this flight attendant. And so the lady says, how bad is this turbulence going to be? I mean, he said severe turbulence. Is that really bad? And hysterically to me at the time, although based on several other things, I've gotten the impression that Icelandic people are just incredibly direct and straightforward.
Part of the culture.
I think it's just part of the culture. I think this was like representative. So the lady's response was, oh yes, in the official ranking system of turbulence, severe is the worst kind that there is.
Period.
End of sentence. Not like ... but don't worry because ... No like soothing empathy whatsoever. She's like, you asked me a question, I'm giving you a factual answer. Done. Oh, it's the worst that there is. So of course then the lady's like, oh, which is not funny, not laughing at the lady's anxiety, but I'm just watching this thinking, well, this is fascinating. Well, the lady continues to ask questions, and she was like, "Well, and then at some point she goes, well, I'm just afraid that we're going to go down." And the woman, the flight attendant, said, "Oh, no, planes don't go down because of turbulence. Period. End of sentence." Another factual point that, for the most part, made the lady's anxiety go. She goes, "Oh," and the lady said, "It might be very severe. You might end up bruised, or people might be mildly injured potentially." She's like, "You might just be very, very uncomfortable and it's quite scary, but the plane doesn't go down." End of sentence. And then she went on with more questions. She went on to say, and she said, "Well, have you been through it before?" And she said, "Well, I have. And it can be scary, but usually when we get it from ahead, by the time we get there, it's gone. So I don't think we'll even go through it," which actually ended up being the case. So this woman knew a lot more and probably potentially forgot that maybe people would need to know those information. But anyway, I just thought this was a fascinating story in sort of navigating uncertainty and anxiety and fears and such an interesting take. It's not that I thought the woman did it wrong at all. It's just, it was a very different take than maybe I would have taken if I was, leading that moment with this woman. And anyway, I just thought it was just rich with, I was like, I wish Elliot was here so we could talk about this, because I bet it'd be a very interesting conversation.
Well, I just think it's now this is going to sound much more harsh than I mean it, but it's like knowledge without empathy, because what the flight attendant was saying is she was answering the questions directly. Yep. Mm-hmm. How bad's it going to be? Well, this is the worst that it gets.
Which I don't disagree. Like I respect direct honesty.
Exactly.
I really do.
She doesn't want to say, because the alternative is to downplay something that the captain just told you that all evidence tells you could be pretty bad.
Right. Like I would have, had we gone through the turbulence and it was truly severe turbulence, and I looked back on in that moment, and the lady had pretended that severe turbulence was nothing, to where like, oh, severe turbulence, it's just a little
They just
bumpy.
say that. It's just a word that they say.
Right. Like I would have been very brow frowny about that, because that's a kind of dishonesty that I don't think. So this is what I loved about it, is like, okay, she actually was honest the way I wanted her to be honest. So what was the thing that I felt was missing?
Well, okay. So first of all, I don't want this to go by. Brow frowny sounds like it should be a German word, but it's not.
I think it probably is.
Well, I think it ends with Schurken. Brown frowny Schurken.
Brow frowny in shine.
But the reason I said it's knowledge without empathy is because what the flight attendant did was answer the question that was asked, but didn't think about, let alone approach, the question that's really at the root of the inquirer's mind, which is, how bad is it? Am I going to die?
Die a horrible, fiery, falling from the sky death.
So sometimes what really arises in my mind is those times when it's not the answer to the question asked that you're really seeking. So you may want the direct answer, but you want somebody to move further than that. Okay. So I agree that the flight attendant and a leader, should answer a question, should address the fears, etc., but then should go further to dig into, why is this question being asked? What's at the root of it? And that at the root of it for this woman is, am I going to die? Mm-hmm.
Which because she didn't either A, ask a question, or B, remember that that's something that people might be afraid of? I mean, she's been through it a bunch of times. So it'd be things that I wouldn't even remember to mention, that she may not even remember to mention as a fear. Cause she could have said like, yes, it's the most severe kind there is, but it's not dangerous. Like It's not death. There's no peril here.
Right. So I think of it in business, so I would venture to say most small businesses, you've got ups and downs, you've got cycles, you've got lulls, et cetera. So, and we've had lulls certainly, and over our 16 years as a firm. And so if somebody would say to me, geez, we don't seem to have a lot of work to do, or we're in a lull or whatever. Now I have several choices. I could completely discount what they're seeing with, who are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes? I could be saying, no, don't be silly. We have a lot to do, whatever. And then they go back to their, and they're like, well, wait a minute, we don't. Or I can say that, yeah, we're in a lull, but what they're really afraid of is not the lull. What they're afraid of is, but then what if we never get out of it? What if we have to close up the firm and I don't have a job and I can't pay my mortgage and I have to pull my kids out of school and I have to do, that's where their mind is going. And so in the business equivalent of, hey, this is turbulence. This is a lull, but we've had them before. We've been through them 16 years. We're going to have you better enjoy it now, because in about a month or whatever it's going to be, there's going to be no time. So this is it. And I wish everything were a happy medium, not too heavy a workflow, not too light a workflow, just really perfect. And I've never, ever experienced that.
Well, and I actually think there probably are some downsides to that too. I think that's where complacency and sort of like mental moldiness happens when you don't have those reasons to like get up and go, or like those fear stimuli are actually kind of useful, I think. But to me, thank you. This is exactly why I wanted to bring this up, is that I think one of the arts of leadership, is knowing how much it's important to be very truthful and transparent, and then also have this like compassion to explain it. So when you said like business turbulence, to me, it's the difference in we're having a cash flow issue versus so people might see symptoms of a cash flow. And I've worked with people who don't ever like to talk about anything financial with their employees, which in my humble opinion, I don't understand, but whatever, everyone to each his own. But they're like, well, I don't want them to know we're having cash flow issues. I'm like, yeah, but they're seeing the symptoms of it. You're like cutting back on this, or you're like, okay, we can't spend any, don't do that because we're trying to save money. So they'll see your panic in some way, shape, or form. And there's a difference between, and so then they will make up things about that. So that woman sitting on that airplane was making up fears based on the small amount of information that she had. And so people will make things up. So where it's important to like explain the difference between cash flow and actual revenue, like we're fine. We have plenty of billing. This one person hasn't sent us a check and it just puts us on a cramp, but it's not a long-term problem.
I will just jump in real fast. I remember hearing a story from somebody in one of the many, many, many failed startups during the dot-com era in Silicon Valley. Mm-hmm. And they started out, they were in this great office space. And one of the things they touted was they got free soda, right? They had soda machines, but you just pressed the button. You didn't put money in. Right. And, the soda would come out and that was great. And then after a while, you had to put in 50 cents or whatever it is, and then you get your soda. And then, but when it went up to $2, what his comment was, when it went from soda is a perk to soda has to be a profit center, that's when it really came home to me.
It was a problem. Oh, that's brilliant. People pick up on small things. So they need to know the truth. I still don't think there's any value in pretending like legitimate problems aren't legitimate. Right. But I think trust comes when you can be truthful about what's real, but then also compassionate and understanding about the fears that like spark out of those truths, and addressing them as much as possible, asking people like, what are you afraid of? Every time there's a merger or an acquisition, everyone's afraid they're going to lose their job. Just even addressing that. Even if you would never pretend like, oh, everyone's going to be exactly the same on the other side of this. That's probably not true, but you can. But to ignore it certainly doesn't help. To pretend that everything's going to be fine certainly doesn't help. To be truthful but compassionate, I think, is the way that you can keep anxieties at the appropriate level that that they don't end up creating other problems.
No, and I think part of the conversation has to be, okay, well, this turbulence is going to be bad business or air travel. It's going to be bad. Here's how we've prepared for it, because it's not unexpected. It's not something that's never happened before. In business, we have this law. That's why God made lines of credit, right. Or that's, we've been through this before. And yes,
and guess what? We've been wanting to clean up the admin drive for years.
Correct.
Let's do it now.
These are the things that we have to do in order to get prepared for the next rush. So that, and I think there's also a candor and a value to transparency when you as the leader can say, I hate this. Because you don't have to be the captain. You don't have to have the captain say, I love turbulence. But you can say, I hate it too. And, I got to tell you, years and years ago, I used to get so freaked out by this because I was like, what if I never recover? And then I realized that, I hate these times, but we've got a solid book of business. We've got solid billings. We have a great market niche, and this is why we do what we do in terms of marketing and branding and all that. So we'll just have to get through it, and let's clean up the admin drive.
Right. Well, I think this is one of those topics that so easily falls into a very binary perspective for folks. They imagine that if you're going to be transparent, that you're running out with the sky is falling news every 35 seconds, and that's also not helpful. Not everybody needs to know every little blurble and like every little tiny detail of everything. It's not. I
love the word blurble.
Blurble. I'm really scratching for words here today. Brain's a little drained, but you don't need to because part of leadership is also knowing when people don't need to know every tiny little. It's such a hard thing to articulate because there are no hard and fast rules about do it this way and it works. It takes a very intuitive, perceptive discernment of what information here is helpful and will give people what they need to actually find their own stability and security in it. So if I were that lady sitting there, I would want to know if we hit severe turbulence. There are three things I'd want to know. If we hit severe turbulence, because they're calling it severe turbulence, it will be quite severe, and planes don't go down from it. So however rocky and scary it is, you don't have to worry about dying. You might be hurt, you might be sore tomorrow because of it, but your death is not imminent because of it. And then also that there's a decent chance that by the time we get there, it's gone. Those are three facts that make me go, okay, this might be pretty scary, like a really violent roller coaster I didn't decide to get on, but I'm not going to die, and so I can get through it.
No, I agree. Two things. First of all,
smirking the whole time I was smirking
is because I have to just take a detour. There's a great Ron White routine where he's on a plane and one of the engines goes out, and the woman next to him in this apocryphal story says, "Oh my God, can we keep going with one engine?" And he says, "Sure. I believe that this can take us all the way to the crash site." And she says, "Well." But we can't, we're an hour out, we're 200 miles out, whatever it is. We can't go very fast. He goes, "Are you kidding? We're going to beat the paramedics there by at least half an hour." So anyway, that's what was coming to my mind. Well,
actually, wait. So I do want to go back to the main thread, I think, unless this one just becomes a better one. But there is actually something to that. When I was a kid, I can remember several times doctors or nurses giving my mom quite the side eye because she knew me. And what she knows about me, and just in the care and feeding manual of Jody Hume, when I am genuinely afraid and anxious and nervous about something and I need some sort of comforting, actually the worst thing you can do is be really kind and compassionate and sweet and loving me. I will just dissolve. I actually need somebody to crack a joke or maybe even be a little bit abusively mean and be like, "Knock it off, you're fine." I actually need that. And I can't explain it, but I've apparently always been that way. And so we would be at the doctor's and my mom would sense that something was making me nervous. I had an infected toe one time and she was like, the toenail had gotten cut and they were talking about possibly having to do this very minor toenail surgery kind of thing. And I apparently was getting somewhat anxious. And so she said to me, "Jody, just stop. The worst thing that's going to happen is they'll have to cut that leg off." And I immediately knew that she was joking. And if she was joking, then it wasn't that bad. And I instantly felt better. But I distinctly remember the doctor's face like, "Oh, what a horrible mother." But she knew that that's what I needed. And so I think that's part of this is knowing your people and knowing the culture, knowing, the moment and what amount of truthfulness or what amount of joking or what amount of sort of creating a sense of stability and trust, because it is the art of this and why it can be really tricky.
Well, I think it can be really tricky because you have to figure out what information how to give, how transparent to be. And so that's why I wanted to return to a comment that you made, because I think it's a really important facet to this conversation, which is in the midst of your reaching a different point, you said, in my personal opinion, I don't understand, I'm putting words in your mouth, but I don't understand why people would make the decision not to share any financial information with their team or their employees. And I agree with you. Although I think this would be a much more dynamic issue if I just told you were flat out wrong. But because we'll make it available. Anybody in the firm can actually go online and knows where it is, and they can find out exactly how much money came in this month and from whom. They can. Now, I worked at firms where it was like CIA top secret clearance, which I only attained when I was an equity partner, and I didn't understand what is somebody going to do. But some firms believe that you should never share that. And I'm curious why you reached your opinion that some level of transparency is important.
Because, well, first of all, I grew up, for lack of a better word to say it, in a firm where they shared things with us in the same way that it's interesting. I grew up in a family where my parents, especially my mom, put decisions on us. Like, she made us make our own decisions quite early. And I say made us because anyone who says, I wish I get, teenagers, like, I want to make my own decisions. I'm like, making your own decisions,
sometimes
actually,
you don't.
It's not that fun sometimes. We had to make our own decisions and then live with and navigate the consequences. And I grew up in a firm when I started working at the architecture firm that was very much like that. They shared with us financial information. They shared with us leadership decisions. And because they wanted us to understand the complexities with which they're doing. It's interesting. It's not that I necessarily think that it's bad or wrong to not share those things, but I think if you choose to not share those things, then you have to accept that along with that means you won't have people who can help you navigate. They'll just have to look at you for clues about what to do next or what not to do because they don't have any information to have an internal GPS. So even if I worked with one client one time who didn't want to share anything, I said, look, but he was so frustrated because his people didn't understand the how much certain expenses were of their overall stuff. I said, so just show them a graph that says like, we bring in this much and this much of it is going out in expensive. That's enough to at least give them like, oh, I see, that doesn't work. Like they have to be able to see that kind of stuff. And I found that because in the firm that I grew up in, we had that knowledge and we were brought in on bigger decisions, we were able to help steer the company in the way that we all wanted it to go because we understood. Whereas when people don't have information and aren't part of the decision-making process or the conversation, here's the thing that I see happen all the time. And if this feels familiar, then this would be a great place to look. If you as a leadership team or a leader on your own spend a ton of time evaluating options and whatnot and figuring out what to do about something, and then you go tell people about it and they're irritated, it's because they didn't see that you were like, they didn't see the whole thought process you went through. We talked about that a little bit before, but we were talking about this last week that I think what sometimes people don't understand is that almost like very rarely in leading a company are a group of people looking at like a really spectacular, perfect option that has no predictable unintended consequences that you're not happy about, and then a bunch of other things, and then pick those things. Like most of the time, you've got 2 or 3 or 4 super imperfect options, all of which come with side effects or outcomes that you don't love, but you have to choose between those. And so I think helping people see that landscape, it's the reverse part of this empathy conversation. It allows returned empathy back around what you're navigating so that they're not just jumping to a conclusion. They're like, well, that's a stupid option.
No, that's a
decision rather.
And I think that there's a distinction that has to be drawn between some level of transparency and explaining things and an outright recommendation that every company is run as a democracy.
Oh, no.
And that's not what we're saying at all.
Nope.
So just because I'll share certain things, and there are certain decisions that we take on, and I open it up to the group. Sometimes it's like, a parent would do, which is to say, look, you're going to have vegetables, but you can choose peas or carrots,
right.
But we are going to have vegetables at this meal. It's not going to replace it with, candy. So it's not, and I've had frequent conversations, even on little things like, well, not little in the scheme of things, but big for frontline people. So I might say, for example, we're going to change banks. Now, if you've ever changed a bank in your company, you know what a huge pain that is. So many things come off of your bank. The credit card charges come into your bank and everything is automatically billed and all that. And it's not a huge pain, generally speaking, depending upon how large your company is, for the president or the people in the management team. It's a huge pain for the frontline people.
Right.
That have to navigate that. So if I know that we're going to change banks, I'll go in and then I'll assemble a team of the people who are actually directly affected and say, okay, we're going to change banks, but I'd like you to be in on the decision on how we do it, when we do it, and even to whom we do it, which bank we transfer to.
And what are the deciding features? I mean, you may pick a bank based on their, I don't know, I'm going to make stuff up, like their interest rate and this and that other. But if because of the nature of your business, the fact that your current bank has like remote deposit and this new bank doesn't, and you get so many, like that could be something that would send your administrative office into chaos if they couldn't do some one tiny feature.
Right.
And I don't know what that would be, but
no, but that's exactly right. They have to know.
Care about?
Because I don't know every single detail that is a big thing in their jobs.
Yep. Exactly.
Well, we can't print this report. If we go to this software, we can't print this report. And the problem is the information you request on a weekly basis comes only from this report.
Yeah. Yes.
And we can't print it. So there is transparency. There's transparency when I share revenues. People can see it to the extent they want to check in. A lot of people don't, but to the extent they want to check in, they can see if there's a good month, good year, good whatever. And it makes my life a little bit easier if I say, okay, we're going to reinvest this, or the bonuses are going to be this, or it makes it easier because it's based upon a real level of knowledge. It
also reduces the gap that they're expected to just have a leap of faith that you are thinking things through. I mean, to me, it's very much that, what's that thing where people lay down and everybody puts two fingers under them and you can lift them up, like levitate them sort of thing. You can levitate a business a lot better if people just have a sense of what's going on. And so I think it serves two purposes. One, whatever bank you look at, if they just had some input on it, they're less likely to just be, I mean, people tend to react to change negatively. They'll say like, oh, why do we have to change this thing? Unless it's overtly apparent, why not? But so there, it sort of eases that transition because they had some input on it. They've voiced their concerns about really important things. I mean, they needed that report and you just changed without asking, you're still going to have to deal with all that. That's the thing. Like, I think part of what I don't understand about transparency is and I don't even think transparency is quite the right word. It's more just like involvement or exposure to things, not like transparency.
No,
like you get to see everything.
Yeah, they're not auditing your books.
No. It's just like here's a peek behind the curtain at times that makes sense,
right, so
that you have a sense of what's going on. But then also to grow leadership. So both of those things. Both of those boxes were checked in when I was a very, very young associate at the firm. We would come to the retreat and they would always have us do some exercise that we had no this is getting back to your thing about this weird conflation of imagining that if you involve people that then it's a democracy where they think they get to decide.
Right.
And it's not been my experience that people react that way. They don't automatically assume that if you ask their opinion or ask for their input, that then everything's going to happen the way they said it. It's just not. And
sometimes they actually go the other way. They go, thank God I don't have to make these decisions.
Yeah, I don't want to make this. This sounds like a terrible decision. I'm so glad I don't have to make it. Exactly. But they would have us involved in some sort of, like one time we went out and they said, oh, okay, we think we're going to have about this much for bonuses. How would you guys break it up? And they gave us like an hour to decide. Well, reporting that back to them, we had no expectation that then they were going to break it up that way. They were very interested in some of our choices. They're like, really? You would give that to that person, versus it put us in the leadership position of deciding how much we would give ourselves versus other people, which is a very interesting thing that I got to participate in early that I don't think people much, because of course there's part of you who it's like, well, we're the ones like, doing all this stuff at the pseudo top, like we should get our, big, but you have to realize like, that's really not how it works at the end of the day. Like you have to think about it the other. So that was important. So they got lots of input from us that was important. And we were growing leadership muscles, or they would do something like, we were perfectly fine financially, but they said, if we had to get rid of 5 people, who would you, or if we could only keep 5 people, who would it be? Again, it sounds a little bit like a horrific exercise, but just that perspective of building the muscle of how would you handle it, like hypothetical, but very real kinds of things. From a growing leadership standpoint, if you don't use that transparency or exposure, I don't know how else people are supposed to really build their muscles of leadership if you don't involve them. Yeah.
And I think that the difficult conversations that are going to be difficult become even more so. They become severe turbulence.
Exactly. Fasten your seatbelts.
So that's our story.
But the discussion doesn't have to end here.
No, it does not.
In fact, we don't want it to.
No, we don't.
That is why we actually have our private Facebook group,
which we started to make sure that we could get your comments, your rants, your thoughts,
your stories.
You
can find links to that group as well as show notes and links to subscribe via email and how to find us just about anywhere you can possibly find podcasts at sohere'smystory.com.
And you can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at SHMS Podcast.
And since we know it takes a village.
Yes, it does.
We'd like to thank our village, our super talented, incredibly patient team.
And occasionally snarky team.
Yeah, but in the best of ways.
In the best of ways.
Snarky.
Yes.
Good mockery.
So a huge shout out to the people who actually help us produce our show. First, our sound engineer, Tom Hansen.
Thanks to Christy Schmier for our brilliant show notes and all the other fantastic writing she does for us.
And to Taylor Mathauer for doing just a little bit of everything.
Including wrangling us.
Which
is no small feat.
No, it's not.
This is Jody Hume.
And I'm Elliot Wagenheim.
And you've been listening to So Here's My Story.